It's rare that we're on time. Good evening. This is the Encinitas Environmental Commission. I'm Chair Ari Novi, calling this meeting to order. Chamomile, can you lead us in a roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Novi.
Present.
Commissioner Adams.
Present.
Commissioner O'Connor.
Here.
Commissioner Kramer.
Present.
Commissioner Parker.
Here.
Commissioner Morrison.
Here.
Commissioner Switzler.
Present.
Let the record show we have all 7 members of the Environmental Commission tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. Please join us if you'd like for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the posted agenda.
Thank you. Do we have any oral communications?
We have a few. I'll announce
Fantastic.
the first speaker is Mr. James McDonald with a nice time donation from Connor McDonald. And tonight, Mr. McDonald would like to speak about bees and biodiversity.
Hello, my name is James McDonald, the owner of the Encinitas Bee Company, where instead of poisoning your bees, we do live removals. This is my son Connor. He's in here with me. And the main thing I'm here, I want to get some housekeeping done. We recently made Encinitas last time I was before you talking about Bee City USA. It passed, and thank you. There was a bit of a mess up. You're supposed to do your application, and I forget the terminology, ratified, and it got backwards, and so it actually hasn't become anything yet. The application hasn't been applied. I'm on top of that and getting things in motion there. The one thing I'm putting effort into, and it was just good luck, is this native plant initiative. They go hand in hand. And they want to form committees. I'm trying to get everyone on the same page. My real objective, I got to meet with Joy and let her know what's happening in San Diego. My personal sentiments are San Diego County is doing this native plant initiative. They're putting all the money. I would almost hope the Encinitas just put the brakes on a bit and let's see what the county do. Let them dump all their money. Let all the scientists weigh in before we get something going there. And so that's the first thing I'm working on. And then the Native Plant Society, they're an important group. I need to get them in. They somehow got out of the loop, and we're committed to doing that. My main purpose here is, and I have my son here, just to thank you guys. I mean, it just kills me. This place is empty. You are talking about life-altering, world-change things, and you don't have the bodies here. If there's a city council meeting on, I don't know, dog poop on the sidewalk or a crosswalk, it just jam-packed full of angry people. You have an amazing speaker list in your presentation. Now that the virus is over and things have gone, I do hope to, get on next door and just get at least let people know what's going on. I brought books in. This is Teeming with Microbes, All the Biology of the Soil, The Mind of the Bee, the amazing book on the Biodiversity Conference in Canada, in layman's terms, really important things. My point is they're all kind of saying the same thing. Biodiversity is so important, and we're killing things off without even knowing what value they have. Things like global warming. We don't know what we need, and we don't know what the next thing is. And so it's just so important to maintain what we have, even though if it doesn't have value now in 10 years. And that is the point I hope to get across. And if any other book I see is by Lisa Schaefer, you get so many people I see in here just beating their head against the ground, angry and accomplishing nothing. Tiny little book with just everything in it, and with the importance on civility. We can get up here and be nice. So I'm sure you have a lot of people in here waving their wand, wanting to change this law. A lot of the stuff is not in your power to change. And this book is a simple little thing by our council member that really summarizes what needs to be done. Okay, my son has stage fright and doesn't like to talk, so the most important question, how often do we get stung? What do we do with the bees?
We, safely relocate them back to our house, and we get stung quite often. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for your time. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Nelson Lomelt with San Diego Community Power. San Diego Community Power is seeking feedback and comment on San Diego Community Power's Community Power Plan.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, Chair Novi and commissioners. So I'm here just to kind of give you a little presentation on our community power plan. We are right now we just released a public draft of this plan, and we're seeking comment on it. So we are not by any means done with this, which is why it's important that I come here and talk to you and seek some input from you all, or at least ask for your input. If we go to the next slide, starting off with just a simple, who we are, who San Diego Community Power is. We are a local not-for-profit provider of clean, renewable energy. So we have two service offerings, Power On, which is 50% renewable energy and it's the standard one for most of our member jurisdictions. But in Encinitas, we are actually offer Power 100, which is the standard option for everyone in Encinitas. So City Council, when they decided to join us, decided to go 100% renewable energy from the get-go. So congratulations to you all. Next slide. So as I said, we serve 7 different member jurisdictions, including the city of Encinitas. So we offer service to the city of Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, La Mesa, San Diego, and starting on April 1st, we're going to be offering service to National City and the unincorporated communities of the county. So we're really excited about that. Next slide, please. So at its simplest form, what we do is we go out and we buy renewable energy from the open market, and we incentivize the development of renewable energy sources in our area, in our local Southern California region as well. But we use SDG&E's transmission and distribution lines to deliver that electricity to our customers, to everyone that is in our service area. So that is what we do at its most basic, but really as a local not-for-profit public agency, we're here really to serve the needs of our community, which is why we went and did this community power plan. Next slide, please. So this is our 5-year strategic plan for the types of customer energy programs that we should be offering to our community. So now that we are in existence, we have done the enrollment, we are now in a position to start offering services back to our community. So we've came up with this plan, have been working on this for the last couple of months, that tries to incorporate all of the different needs that we heard from the community, our organizational goals, needs, and priorities, as well as looking at what are the existing programs that are out there, and how can we fill in the gaps for those or maybe make those even better. And then also taking a look at all the funding that's available. I think we all are familiar with IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of funding coming down that. And so we're looking at ways that maybe we can capture some of that funding and bring it into our region. Next slide. So this has been a long process. We started this effort back in July with a lot of community engagement. So I could go on for hours and hours talking about all the engagement that we did, and we actually will present on some of that at our presentation that we're doing next Tuesday, which I'll give some more information. But we did this process to really try and determine what does our communities need, what do they want, and what are their priorities that we can fill in through this plan. And so now we're at the draft stage of this, where it's open to the public to give us feedback on this. We are using an interactive tool to gather feedback, so people don't need to write a long letter, a formal letter, or anything of that, get lawyers or anything of that sort to submit public comment to us. We are targeting that our board may adopt this plan in May, but that all depends on the type of public comment we get and the feedback we get as well. So next slide. Just quickly, I wanted to go over some of the recommended program types that I think might be of interest to the commission. So we broke this plan out into two strategies, or into two different terms, the short term and the midterm. And the short term is really about filling immediate needs. So as a new organization, we're still building up our reserves, trying to meet these larger goals. But we know that there are a lot of programs out there that exist and that we can do a lot with. So it's all about trying to leverage funding and test out some innovative pilot concepts. And so you see here some of those programs that we're going to be testing now and launching in the short term. And the exciting part comes in the midterm, if we go to the next slide, which is where we start to test out some of these bigger programs around building electrification, distributed energy resources, battery storage, energy efficiency, and transportation electrification. And if you see, the list is kind of like really long and all over there's a lot of different groups here. So it's really because we heard from the community that all of this was a priority to them. So this is our attempt in a way for us to try and address some of those needs. These programs fall into the midterm because they require a little bit more time to establish and requires us working with our member agencies and with our community-based organizations to really get up and running and make sure we get this right. Next slide. So why I'm here is I really want to get your input and feedback from all of you and from all of your communities that you may represent. So we have this document up for public comment now. It's open until the end of March, until midnight at the end of March. And we have this handy website that you can go to, or you can scan the QR code if you want to. That takes us to our website that kind of explains what the community power plan is. And then you can click on there to read the plan in 3 different languages. So we wanted to make sure it was as equitable as possible. So we translated it into Spanish and into Tagalog to make it accessible, because those were the 3 most common languages in our region. Next week, as I mentioned on Tuesday, we have a presentation that we will be giving that summarizes all of the work that we did. So it's going to be an hour long, longer than this public comment is. But I'm hoping that you can register for it, or encourage your friends and neighbors and anyone listening to register for the presentation and learn more about this. And really, we want this public comment. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamelt from San Diego Community Power, and that concludes our oral communications.
Okay, thank you. I see we have no presentations today, so I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes of February 9. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we have approved minutes. Now we'll move on to number 7, informational items, and we'll hear first from a clean-shaven Eric Steenbach.
Hey there. So thank you for having us tonight. I'm sitting in front of a full commission. It's exciting to see. I'm kind of intimidated, to be honest with you. It's been a little while since I've sat in front of you all. I did bring with me one of my staff, Paul Meckler, who has helped in this update that we're going to go over, this manual. We're really here tonight. And ironically, Crystal Nahara was on the team that created this manual back in 2016. So I've got my A team here for sure. So, what we're going to go through tonight is we're going to be updating the City Stormwater Best Management Practices Design Manual, or BMP Design Manual. It was originally adopted in 2016. And there's been a significant amount of sort of regional effort to develop new standards and approaches to meeting these obligations. So I'll just kind of walk you through how we sort of the sort of background, the backdrop to all of this. So it's essentially what is the city's stormwater BMP or best management practices design manual. It's a set of water quality standards for new and significant redevelopment projects. So it's a significant part of the city's stormwater management efforts. It's regulated and defined by the San Diego Regional Municipal Stormwater Permit. So the city of Encinitas and all the jurisdictions in the county as owners and operators of municipal separate storm sewer systems. I know it's a cool term. Basically, stormwater conveyance system. We're permitted by the San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board to essentially discharge water out of that system. The permit is backstopped by a variety of programs to help improve the quantity or reduce the quantity and improve the quality of that runoff into our local surface waters. So back in 2016, there was a regional model developed to address specifically this section of our permit, which is related to land development. And so we locally adopted a BMP design manual based on that model in 2016. And then the last bullet, really, what are we trying to do? We're trying to improve the quality and control the quantity of runoff from new and significant redevelopment projects. So actually, so essentially the way that the manual is built is it really kind of characterizes different development projects or significant development and significant redevelopment projects. You're either, and that's sort of the tier in terms of what performance standards needs to be met by that project. And when I say met in that project, that's in the design of that project and ultimately, obviously, the construction of those facilities to control to improve the quality and control the quantity of runoff. So your highest priority is a priority development project or a PDP project because we love acronyms. It's determined by size, type, and design features. So you really have pretty stringent performance standard requirements for a priority development project. You have source control, site design. I'll get into what those mean. And then you have pollutant control, basically treatment of runoff. And then you also, in a lot of these projects, you have hydromodification. That's a really cool term, I know, for basically the volume of runoff, but also controlling how that exits the site. And so you don't have downstream impacts to streamline erosion and bank impacts and those types of things. And then you get standard projects. Those are any projects that create or replace 500 square feet of impervious surface. You have, again, the site design, and then you have bioretention, which is essentially bringing water into landscaped areas, or equivalent treatment and runoff reduction measures. And then lastly, you have a basic project. Those have probably the least amount of requirements, but the city of Encinitas does require BMPs, basically site design and source control on basic projects. Actually, there is a fourth, and it's an exempt project, but I won't, that explains itself, I think. So what are we talking about? This is just to give you a visual of sort of what you see. The idea, if you look at these photos, I think the one thing that stands out to me is like, what is that? It's just a bunch of plants. But really, that's the intention. Those are actual functional drainage design features that are engineered, sized to capture and treat a certain volume of water. As established by the municipal stormwater permit. So these things are all over the city. If you have a keen eye like we do, we know where they are. We see them all the time, but the idea really is to incorporate them so they're just natural features within a development project. And so it is a good thing that they don't have to stick out like a sore thumb, but they are functional and they're designed and they're engineered to, like I said, treat water and control the volumes of water that are discharging off of a developed site. So why am I sitting here tonight? So we are updating our manual. We are looking to the commission for their broad set of disciplines that you can approach and evaluate these manual updates through. The summary of the manual really, it's funny when you distill months of work down to like 4 bullet points, but that's really what it comes down to. It's a really technical document. Where the first and foremost sort of overarching update element is we're trying to align it with regional updates. Essentially, there's been a lot since 2016. Other jurisdictions have kind of moved forward and modified certain things. We've gotten green lights from the Regional Water Quality Control Board on how to approach those, so we're trying to bring some of those locally. One significant area is pavement maintenance projects. I won't get into the details, but there's a lot of kind of funky language in a lot of these documents on what exactly is pavement maintenance versus replacement, because if you replace all the way down to native soil, then it triggers a bunch of requirements that may be really cumbersome for a project. So it's offering some clarification there. We're providing additional guidance and information on performance standard for all types of projects. That includes all kinds of new fact sheets, and it really is to bring the document sort of to the state of the art is really what our intention is. And then there's additional treatment options for the standard projects, and that's where we're really trying to incentivize and build that into our document, where a project can get credit for basically water capture and reuse. Where before that really wasn't. There's a standard that they would design to a design capture volume, a certain volume of water that you had to capture and treat. And so we want to incentivize projects. If you use capture and reuse, you can minimize that volume that you need to capture and treat. And so you don't have to have such large facilities on your site. So say you're a single family home. I'll just give you a silly, number example. If your design capture volume is 100 gallons, and it has to be 6 feet by 10 feet, if you can get that reduced down to 75 gallons by having a rain barrel that captures 25 of those gallons, then you can have a smaller footprint best management practice. Does that make any sense, or is that a good illustration? I don't know. So that's essentially it. So, I'm going to give some credit to the last speaker. You had a really good link and a QR code and everything to the document, and I had kind of that moment where, oh my God, I don't have that on my presentation. So I can provide everybody the link to the document. You will be so stunned at how robust it is, but the changes really do distill down to 4 bullet points. And our public comment period opened on March 6th. We're accepting comments through March 24th. Here's where you can send your comments to. Obviously, we can provide this all to you outside of this. Don't feel like you need to scribble this down. And with that, I'll kind of turn it over to questions. We'd love to hear your feedback, anything up front, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Eric. I have a question. Is this document binding? Are the BMPs, do projects have to adhere to the BMPs in this document?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it's actually codified in our ordinance. So it's required, and it's part of the discretionary permitting process. So projects are conditioned to install these features. And then actually we have a long-term maintenance program, which also we go out and we verify that these features are still in place and they're still functioning as designed. Mm-hmm.
And projects are new homes that are being built too?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, a neighbor had one done, and it's pretty amazing the way it went through and rocks and it rises, and it's as beautiful as those pictures are of the planting that's in it now. But yeah, it looks like it should work.
Not everyone at once. Come on.
I'll go, Eric.
I knew it.
You knew
I'm
it'd be me,
teasing you.
right? So I
Go ahead.
do appreciate that, having to use the manual in my work. Are you on your outreach effort? I know. Thank you for coming to us.
Sure.
Are you reaching out to the industry professionals, all the civils that come through your door, and all the QSPs and all those
Yep.
fun people that have to do the monitoring inside the city?
Yep.
Cool.
Those would be all the practitioners. So they're the ones that will actually have to take this manual and when they sit down, pen to paper, if that's really a thing anymore, and design these projects, they'll have to meet these standards.
Right. But on your outreach to get input, I mean,
Yeah. Yes.
we're a great group, but
I know.
those people, okay, cool.
You got it.
I'm curious if there's any nexus with this and any efforts to daylight, any hydrologic features that have been put, into underground or, otherwise improve, stream channels and, drainage channels that were natural at some point.
clarify.
So if I have a project on a site that, has a highly engineered, hydrological element where there was once a natural water element, are there any possibilities for credits or design opportunities that meet, the regs in here to, bring functionality back in a natural way, not just in an enginered way?
Sure.
I mean, and
Absolutely.
think about Cottonwood Creek. It's
Right.
it's underground. Under
Right.
most of the city now.
Right. The answer is yes. And the reality from a water quality perspective is the most effective way to address all of this stuff is natural stream function. So if you can restore natural stream function or incorporate that in some way into your project design, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
That brought up another question about just having nexuses here. Are there any efforts to implement the native plant program into some of these kind of like more engineered natural features?
Funny you should ask that. Yes, and I was anticipating that question in a good way. So very much so in all of the landscape features that are sort of, there's BMP fact sheets all throughout this. Native plants are the number one in terms of plant palette. Some of these, in terms of their design, it's important for what your plant selection is because you're looking for specific function, you're looking for uptake, you're looking for that type of thing. So native plants may not ultimately be the best for that, but that's at the discretion of the designer. One of the other sort of administrative pieces that we're going to incorporate into this update is we want to build the resolution that ultimately council, will consider with an opening for updates such as that. So as the native plant conversation continues, and right now there's reference to the county's native plant approach. If we develop that more locally, obviously we can insert that and make that part of this manual. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
Good to see you.
Yep. Good to see you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to 7B, and that will be Commissioner O'Connor.
Did we have a public speaker on this? No.
Yes, for your item, yes, we do. Would you like the speaker first?
Sure.
Excellent. We have former Environmental Commissioner Jim Wong in support of item 7B.
Gee,
Former award-winning commissioner.
I didn't know I was going to be following the A team on this, and I don't have any slides. I don't even have a QR code, so I hope you don't set your expectations too high on this. Anyway, good evening, Chair Novi, Vice Chair Adams, commissioners. My name's Jim Wong, Cardiff. So I'm not that used to being down here. I used to be more up there. But I know in all the years that we're up there, we didn't pass anything as attractive to the media as you did last month. And there are 4 TV cameras here for the smoking ban, so congratulations on that. Instead, I just spent my time writing these reports on single-use plastics, like straws and plastic utensils and styrofoam clamshell containers and whatnot. But we didn't do plastic bags because that's supposed to be taken care of by SB 270. But SB 270 is a rather holy bill. And I don't mean to imply any religious prominence to that. I mean, it has some loopholes in it that the plastic industry is happy to exploit. So the first one being pre-checkout bags, and I think you have a different name on your agenda, but pre-checkout bags are the bags that are typically in rolls when they're bulk merchandise, as Commissioner O'Connor has. And shoppers will typically use multiple ones of those, many of those during a single shopping trip. And those aren't covered by SB 270. The other one is the so-called multi-use bags, which are not really multi-use. They're not defined by usage, but mainly by dimensions, how thick the plastic is, how big the opening is. And I don't think these are really loopholes that the plastic industry is happy about. The plastic industry loves those thicker multi-use bags because that's more plastic for them to use, and most of them are just single-use bags anyway, because I've never seen anyone bringing one back and using it more than one time. Now, for the first hole, the pre-checkout bags, SB 1046 might take care of that. That's in 2 years. But it doesn't say anything about the carry-out bags, checkout bags, whatever ones that Commissioner O'Connor showed. So both of these are detrimental, as you know, and for all the reasons that you use to ban other single-use plastics, utensils and styrofoam, et cetera, apply to this as well. It's just that there's these holes that should be plugged. And that's what Berkeley did. And I hope that you can use that as a paragon, because that keeps Encinitas as a prominent, leading environmental leader. And I hope you will continue to do that. So please approve this proposal and show other cities what they can and should do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. So I had mentioned that Jim had approached me or us to look into this, having been on the commission along with Manager Steinbach that put through the ordinances that Encinitas now has. There were some loopholes, and then when the plastic industry saw that the bill that banned the thinner up to 2.25 mil bag was considered a single-use bag, well, they thumbed their noses and made that 5 mil bag. And so now millions and millions of these are being used and discarded, landfill or, so that's why we're here tonight real quick to discuss it. And so I think we have the slides, and I think Katie's gonna just do some we mostly know all of this already, some of this data, but Katie's gonna quickly zoom through some of the reasons why this is important.
I think this is not news to anybody here, but single-use plastics are a nuisance to the environment and also to our community. So they're petroleum-based, they're not biodegradable. They take about 1,000 years to quote-unquote biodegrade, but they don't go away. They just turn into smaller pieces of plastics, which turn into microplastics, which now contaminate our air, soil, water, and have entered the food chain. And we're all learning more about just how the notion of recycling plastic is a myth. Very few plastics are actually recycled. The situation's gotten worse with other countries no longer accepting our garbage. And so we are kind of just putting this stuff in landfills more and more. So for those question marks are supposed to be single-use plastics, but single-use plastics or plastic bags, only about 1 to 3% are recycled. And even when they are recycled into another product that can be used once, and then they're no longer able to be recycled. They end up in the landfill then. So plastics pollute our oceans and coasts. The San Diego Coastkeeper Beach Cleanup reported about 53% of collected debris was plastic. And Jim has been going around town chatting with EDCO people, and he can give you a report on that.
Sure. So one of the things, the MRF, the recycling facility, it has conveyor belts. And I asked the CEO what was the number one things that they were hoping to get taken care of to make the waste stream a little bit better. And he said one of the top 3 was plastic bags, because they're not recyclable, but they end up in our blue bins, and they get thrown into the MRF, and this conveyor belt jams. And so they have to stop the line, cut it out. They lose time, they lose money. So he thought it would be a great thing if we could stop the use of plastic bags. That's where that came from. So next slide is, so in 2020, the commissioners that were here and the city council approved 11.27 the Encinitas Municipal Code, which prohibited a lot of the things, utensils, straws, and items like that, for including plastic bags. and it was a 2.25 mil bag for grocery stores, retailers, food providers, and actually farmers markets. And I learned that just in researching. I hear a lot of people say the farmers markets have a lot of plastic bags. Restaurants wasn't included, and that's something I want to address tonight and hope that when we do move forward, restaurants are included in the idea that we're going to stop the use of all plastic, no matter how thick. And that's what Berkeley did recently. So an ordinance or the agenda report would reflect that we would like council to look at stopping all bags of plastic. And there's many alternatives. Paper, the cloth bags that you can use over and over and over again. There is some language in this part of the ordinance that does allow for, there's certain companies that do the accrediting for plastic that truly is compostable or marine biodegradable. So that language does exist in these ordinances because those products do exist. It's a matter of finding them. Because this bag is green, it's actually greenwashing. It's not recyclable in this county in any capacity. So again, this is what we call the pre-checkout, the grapes, you put them in your grocery cart and then post. So what we're hoping to do is mimic Berkeley. And Berkeley decided to, if you look at here down a little bit farther, SB 1046 on this slide, is going to go into effect January 1st, 2025, and that's going to be, the state is going to stop the use of the plastic bags. They're going to have to meet that criteria to be compostable or marine digestible, and or paper or reusable, as I've shown. And so it's a few years to get there, where the state is actually going to do something, but Berkeley decided to use an incentive to try to get people to start now, and that's a 10 cents for those plastic bags that you use, kind of like you do at the checkout side. And that's to start with education. And there is a rainbow at the end of the horizon on 2025, but until then, we're hoping to use that to modify people's behavior to switch and bring their own various types of materials, washable, reusable, forever and ever. I think this one actually has, if you put your broccoli in there, it might stay longer for 3 more days in your refrigerator than just throwing it in your refrigerator. So there's lots of products out there to switch to in the meantime. So again, Berkeley addressed these bags because they know the future is coming to just influence people to quit using them. And then they went all out for the no use of plastic for this type of a bag. So that's what I'm recommending we try to do in our discussion, is to decide if we're in agreement to do an agenda report to send to council to see the interest in changing 11.27 as an amendment, I think, to not have the 2.25, but to get rid of all plastic, however it's worded, similar to what Berkeley's done, and then to use the 10 cents per bag for the produce portion of that till 2025, when SB 1046 does go into effect.
Okay,
What else
next
did I
slide,
miss?
please, Crystal. Thank you. Okay, so when we were kind of just thinking this through, and Jim made us aware of the Berkeley ordinance and going through other ordinances around the state and the country and globally, we just started realizing that we can do more. And so while we're at it, we just thought we'd bring some other things to the table for discussion. So we could, we could strengthen restriction on other single-use plastics. Sorry, that's supposed to be SUPs, not SLPs. So currently, our ordinance doesn't include plastic cups and lids, it doesn't include plastic plates, it includes polystyrene plates and trays, but not plastic plates. It doesn't include plastic takeout containers like these things at the bottom here, which are, you know, I would say the predominant container that you get when you get takeout from a restaurant around our parts. And these are often high recycling numbers, so they're not even like going into the recycling bin once. They're just going straight to the landfill. We could also include condiment packets, sauce cups, you know, either by just banning them outright or requiring that, you know, retailers, or not retailers, food providers, you know, only supply them on request. We could, you know, there's exceptions that could be made, and exceptions exist in all of these ordinances that exist elsewhere, and for our plastic ordinance too. If there's a disability involved, you know, a person could have a plastic straw if they need one, et cetera. And then there's a lot of examples to draw from now, like these single-use plastic ordinances are exploding, and we don't want to be left behind. We are innovators when it comes to environmental conservation and sustainability. So similar ordinances have been passed in LA County, Washington State, Vermont State, Honolulu, Montreal, the whole EU. So the LA ordinance was kind of interesting. So that will take effect in May 2023. It requires all takeout items to be compostable or fully recyclable. And then restaurants that have seats for in-person dining will have to provide reusable dishes and cutlery rather than single-use items. So that's a really cool model. And we could just, you know, adapt language from that ordinance. So that's, you know, another thing for us to discuss and think about. Next slide, please. And then this was, so I don't know how many of you go to the farmer's market, but I have been going a lot lately and realizing there's so much plastic being used at the market that I thought, surely the market just must be exempt from our single-use plastic ordinance. And going back to the ordinance, no, it's not. It's actually included. There's just really no compliance. And so I think we can do a lot, and I'm sure the city already is doing a lot that I'm not aware of. But if there's any way we could maybe strengthen signage and education at markets, special events and farmers markets, just to, again, here's an example from Philadelphia where they have like in front of events and stores, you know, these bags are banned. If we can do similar things like that, that might go a long way.
And then I had a question I had raised myself, I didn't bring up at the appropriate time, was why would we worry about this bag if in 2025 it's going to be, you know, pretty much outlawed unless it's compostable or degradable? And that's because between now and then, we found some statistics that say about average home uses 1,500 of these bags a year, and with 23,000 homes in Encinitas, if you do the math, it's millions and millions of bags. And if you say, well, half the people aren't doing it, it's still, I've got like 17 million bags, and then if half the people aren't using these, it's 8 million bags, and you can do the numbers. You can get if you can save 1 million bags between now and 2025, it's probably worth the effort to see if the education 10 cents will reduce that number between now and then. That was one of the thought process that I had anyway.
That's all we have, and thanks for listening, and let's open it up for thoughts, comments, questions.
I'm just curious, do any of the draft ordinances that you're looking at deal with the, you know, like paper containers, but that are, you know, coated with plastics? And
I have not, but in having a pretty good relationship with EDCO, that when it's plasticized like that, it's not recyclable. There's nothing that can peel that plastic off currently to make the cardboard reusable and that little thin plastic reusable. It's landfill bound. That product
so
needs to
as long as the language focuses on that non-recyclability, that kind of grabs it off. Okay, thanks.
I think that's the catch, yeah.
So I'm concerned about the language of compostable, because most of the stuff that is compostable is not compostable in our EDCO anaerobic digester. And so since the whole city is going to the waste is going to the digester, I think, our definition of compostable should be what our city is compostable. And so, like compostable bags, compostable cutlery, compostable, plates or whatever is not. And so I think that has to be really, we have to be real careful. And then the other thing is like that, the plasticized cups, like you're talking about, or containers, that's all coffee cups. So that's every single coffee store. So I think that's a
We'd
problem.
have to check in, I'd have to check to see if there are products out there or not that are totally paper.
Well, yeah, so that's what the EDCO guy was telling me, is that there is not, there's no coffee cup that he knows, or that they know of,
That would be allowable.
that would be allowable. So that's my biggest concern. And also that, they were actually very, saying that those plastic cups are recyclable. So.
Some are.
Again, they recycled once, and then, a plastic can only be used basically twice in its life cycle, and then it eventually ends up in the landfill. So it could be recycled once, sure.
So this is a circular triangle 1, which is a recyclable number to EDCO, and it would get processed down to nurdles and then shipped somewhere. And I understand like a plastic chair made out of it. And then however long that plastic chair life is, what do you do with it when it's done? I don't know if in 10 years, if things will change to where the technology can take that plastic and reuse it. But at that point, it's probably landfill bound at what we can do to it today.
Yeah.
And then to your first point, it's on our work plan. Carlsbad had passed that language that you're talking about that's very specific to what EDCO can recycle and digest. And it's under the organics part of which Eric's shop is still in charge of. And I know he's talking with EDCO about looking at that language because it was for Republic, but Republic spoke with EDCO to make sure that the language in the ordinance of what can be used and not used fit what EDCO and Republic can do in the way of compostability and the anaerobic digester. And then on top of that, the bill that's coming out, and here again, I'm not an expert in this, but it must be ASTM standard, which is a organization that accredits what is degradable and not degradable and biodegradable, or OK Compost Home certification. Being in this plastic world, watching the Attorney General of this state, he's going after right now plastic producers. I think there's 6 of them he's identified in state and out of state that make all these claims about plastic and compostability and reusability, and he's holding their feet to the fire. He's making them get all these certifications, and you're going to see a change in the products that are available in California based on the fact of the greenwashing aspect that's going on out there of what truly cannot be composted, as you're saying, not a whole lot. Anything that's plasticized can get through the system, like maybe this triangle 1 can, but 6s and 7s and things. Yeah. And I understand your concern, yeah.
Hey, quick question. So, it's interesting. I didn't realize that they had rules like on the bag thickness for being recyclable or not, or usable or not. Have they defined those same standards for the other items, like single-use cup? Like, is it a thickness that matters, or is it the intended use that matters, or like, what point does the law apply to? Can you have a plastic reusable cup? Well, it seems like that would be acceptable. So, are they going to go define standards for all those types of items, containers and cups and lids and things, or? Has it been done?
I would suspect if this was of a plastic that's thick enough that I'm
Yeah.
going to reuse over and over again, or you see people with the metal water bottles, but you see the heavy
Right.
plastic ones too.
Right.
That's something hopefully you can use for a lifetime, so those probably wouldn't come
I'm just
under-
curious, have any of the laws that come out define that? Have they specified what's?
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
I'd be curious to
Yeah.
see.
I haven't seen thickness defined for things other than bags.
Yeah,
Just-
yeah.
yeah,
I think
just
you almost
bags
have
of
to,
them.
right, if you're not gonna allow it, so I'm curious to see how that evolves.
And I mean, of course, you can bring in your own reusable plastic cup, no matter how thick. It's just, they're not going to give you a super thick,
Right.
expensive cup. Hopefully not. I don't know. Maybe not.
So it's kind of the use then, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
fast food and restaurants and things like that, yeah, okay.
So the lids have been banned for the coffee cups, those dome lids in some ordinances, but the cups are kind of a newer, kind of the next phase. and maybe because of the plastic lining on them.
Thank you, Commissioner Kramer and Morrison. What did they move to if they went from the plastic cup lids? What did they move to? Do you know?
That has not been implemented yet, so I'm not sure of and that would be like the next phase. If we give a presentation associated with an agenda report, we could kind of show some of the alternatives and what
Yeah.
exists so far.
No, thank you, because it's just the whole loophole with the thicker bag. I mean, it's just this plastic world that we, and we're so conditioned, I think, so, I really appreciate you kind of bringing this up, because I think it's a big deal. And we're so conditioned to like use this stuff, and like even recently, I don't know, the last year or so, I just stopped using those bags. I just don't use bags I don't need to. I don't need to, I don't need to until they go into so it's just like this conditioning thing. And unfortunately, we've been conditioned to use all this plastic, right? So it's kind of has to go the other way. So I'm all about this. I'm all about 10 cents, 25 cents. Because even if you charge 10 cents, people still use it. Even if you have takeouts that are recyclable, like you said, it's recyclable once and it gets put in a new chair. And how much, I'd venture to say that's less than 30% that actually make it to the recycle bin, right? And they're thick and they're plastic and there's a lot of them. There's a lot of takeout going on.
One of the stats showed maybe max 3% of
3%.
plastic gets.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's a lot of takeout that goes on right now, you know what I mean? And I think it's something that we should address. And like someone said, we kind of are a leader in this, and other places are doing it. So I'm all about it, full throttle. Yeah, and appreciate you doing this. And yeah, I'd love to see us kind of take action on this and be a leader on this. And I think most people, especially in this area, would support it. Do have to keep the restaurant industry somewhat in mind, right? But I think there's a lot of restaurants that and it says compostable, and there's a lot of good products out there, I think. Coffee cups or whatever that we could find. There's a lot of stuff out there that we could do, because, it's a strong industry.
I'm gonna plug Surfrider's Ocean Friendly Restaurant Program, and I actually have one of the packets. There's 7 criteria in there that they have to do, and then they can pick 3 from about another 11 things, and things like they're not using the plastic, they're not using these plastic bags for takeout, and that was one of the parts of the ordinance that wasn't addressed years ago. Restaurants was left out, and that's why I think we should include it, because there's over 180 restaurants in San Diego County not using this plastic, and people are still getting home with their leftovers and their takeout orders without a problem using other materials.
This is great. I'm 100% behind it, and as Mark knows, I was one of those original people with the ocean-friendly restaurants and had to do all the research and go price things out between Smart and Final and what Cisco had on the costs. The ordinance that Jim brought forward on the Berkeley comparison, used the word proven. Don't want to use that word. Mark brought up the ASTM, the American Society of Testing Materials. It's the only way to go, and something I had to do a long time ago when we were vetting out compostable. So if we could be very specific on whatever it is we're allowing, not what we're banning, because it's easier to just say what it is we're allowing per the ASTM guidelines. Probably very important for the compostable, as well as anything that could be considered recyclable. It may help us get away from the higher numbers on the recycling, the 6s and 7s and such. I saw in there about waivers, and I appreciate that, and I would only provide waivers to a designated class per se, like the folks with disabilities. I wouldn't provide waivers for charitable events, because people just use that as a loophole. So I would just make it very specific to another standard, like if you are classified under Americans with Disabilities Act, something to that effect. To be the more specific we are, the better we are. I know that they weren't specific on the mill of the bag. Oh, they were specific on the mill of the bag, and then they found a way around that. So more specific to be more inclusive. Does that make sense? To more specific on what's allowed and what's not, rather than what's not allowed. And as a past Leucadia Main Street president and farmers market founder, I will go talk to Ron because it's been there for a long time, and I think we've spoken to him in the past. So I'll talk to the market manager and bring it to his attention that he's got the attention of the Environmental Commission. They were doing the waste stream diversion there really well in the beginning with the BKM. They're not doing it anymore, yeah, I know, but it's about staffing. It's always been about staffing there. So I'm 100% behind it. Just would love to be very specific on what is allowed as opposed to what isn't allowed, and that'd be super helpful. So thank you guys for doing the work.
I'll just note we have 3 action items to get to and not that much time left. So this was an informational item. Thank you very much. There's no action associated with it. I'm sure we will see an action item in the not too distant future. Thank you so much. Just making sure we don't have any additional public comment on number 8. I'm sorry, number 7.
We do not.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to action items here, and we'll go to Crystal for electric vehicle charging station master plan, 8A.
We have one more item under 7. It's 7C.
You do? Oh my
We'll do it
God,
real quick.
7C.
Potentially the last time we do this one, which is
Hopefully.
the tentative presentation schedule. So I'll bring that up. Maybe. Here we go. So we had talked about doing a presentation tonight on integrated pest management, and we spoke with staff in Parks and Rec, and they weren't available given the amount of time they had to prepare. But they actually recommended that they could meet with the subcommittee on IPM first and meet with them and share about the program and hear input from the subcommittee, and then potentially go from there to a meeting. So we're in discussions on that and working with the subcommittee on that. So we have April 13th is open, May 11th is open, and then here's the suggested topics.
Could I add a topic?
Sure.
Surfrider's ocean-friendly restaurant program.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, now, sorry I jumped the gun, moving to 8A. Right back to you, Crystal.
No worries. Okay, now we're on to 8A, which is the electric vehicle charging station master plan. And I've got our consultant for this project on the line. This is Mike Usen. He's joining us virtually from Washington State. So Mike, are you on the line? Can you unmute and try speaking? Let's see. I don't hear him talking. Hold on just a second. Mike, are you trying to talk? Okay, this was working earlier. I wonder why it's not working now. Is IT in the back? Can you come up front and try to help us at the dais, please? Potentially not. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, commissioners. Okay, Mike, just keep talking, trying, and IT is working on it, and I'm going to go ahead and get started, and then if you are able to pop in, then that would be great. Okay. Oh, there we go. We can hear you. Yes. Yay. Well, I don't know what the difference was, but
Because this has to be on staff PC.
oh, that was it. You told me that before. Okay. All right. So without further ado, Mike, yes, we can hear you. It was my mistake. My apologies. I had to be on the staff PC, which I was not. So that was my fault. So we are on item 8A, which is the electric vehicle charging station master plan. And we had a consultant hired to support us in this effort from DKS, and that is Mr. Mike Usen, who's on the line tonight. He's the project manager for the project. And oh, great, now my keyboard's not working. There we go. Okay. So the recommended actions tonight are to provide input on the draft electric vehicle charging station master plan. And then secondly, to recommend that City Council adopt the EV charging station master plan. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mike to go ahead and give the presentation. And then at the end, of course, we'll have time to answer any questions. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you, Crystal, and thank you, City of Encinitas Environmental Commission. I'm really pleased to be here virtually. And I'm saving a lot of carbon by not flying all the way down to Southern California. We should be on slide 3, presentation content. I can't see the slide, so we're going to have to collaborate here. I'm working blind. So on slide 3, this slide covers basically the overview of what I'm going to talk about this evening, focusing on the context and the objectives, what's behind it, kind of how we did the work, the extensive public outreach process that led to the recommendations, and then what those recommendations are. And those are broken down into both the specific geographic locations throughout the city, as well as some strategic recommendations or general recommendations. And then at the end, we'll have time for discussion. So let's go to slide 4, and then on to slide 5, which says project context. One of the things that's really important is that we're looking forward, right? And so we look around us and we see right now what we have for the very small number of electric vehicles on our roadways. This graph here, which was produced by Deloes, shows the recent growth in electric vehicle adoption. Last year, about 15% of all vehicles sold in the state of California were electric, which was double the previous year. Next year will probably be double again. So expect exponential growth in the sale of electric vehicles over the next several years, and that's going to put a huge demand for chargers going forward. So this ties into the EV charging station master plan, which is implementing the climate action plan goal 4.3 to increase use of alternative fuels. And the dominant alternative fuel for light duty vehicles is expected to be electric vehicles, batteries. We do expect more hydrogen, but those will largely be focusing for long haul freight and for regional transit and other types of heavy duty vehicles. Let's go to the next slide, which says project objectives on the top. So these are the 5 key objectives basically look at what's there today and not just within the city, but surrounding the city to provide some context. So we looked at up to 5 miles around the city limits to evaluate what the existing charging conditions are, then conducting a needs assessment, and then look at some future charging station alternative locations. And I'll talk about those later in the presentation. And then to develop a plan to install the stations throughout the community. And last, but not least, to support residents in their transition from fossil fuel to clean transportation options. So let's go to slide 7, analysis. So I'm going to talk briefly about the analysis. It's fairly technical, and I don't want to waste your time on getting into the details of that, but if there's time in the discussion, I'd be happy to answer questions. So slide number 8 talks about level 2 charging. There are 2 dominant forms of charging when we're talking about public charging. The first is level 2 charging, also known as AC charging, alternating current, and this is 220, 40 volt electrical service. There's a charger in the photograph is in downtown Encinitas, which is an example of one of those, and I'll talk about the numbers and locations of those in a second. The next slide talks about DC fast charging. This is for much quicker charging, and I'll get into explaining this in a little bit more detail as well. The city of Encinitas recently installed these chargers, these DC fast chargers, in the behind City Hall, and these are examples of state-of-the-art chargers that you're seeing more and more of today. These provide a much quicker charge, so you don't have to wait very long. They're not as fast as charging or as gassing a gas vehicle, but they're getting there. So the newer technologies keep getting faster and faster, both on the vehicles and with the chargers. So slide 10, existing EV chargers, shows a summary of our analysis, looking at data from different sources, looking at the existing chargers, both within the city of Encinitas on the sort of the top line, or just below the green on the top. As you can see, there's a total of 29. That's split between about half are level 2 chargers using the J1772 plug, as opposed to the Tesla, which has its own proprietary plug. And then the others are all DC fast chargers. And then it's a mixture of sort of 3 different plug types. There's kinds that are used for Nissan Leafs primarily, which is the Chatamo. There's the CCS Combo, which is for most other vehicles, and then Tesla has its own proprietary charger. Tesla is significant because it is the #1 selling electric vehicle in the world, and so they have a disproportionate importance. As you can see, several of the surrounding communities also have chargers, and that's important because, of course, these are for vehicles, they're mobile, and so it's important to consider your surrounding neighbors. Let's go to the next slide, which maps where these chargers are currently located within the city of Encinitas. This map does not show the surrounding ones, but they're scattered around, and they tend to be in places you'd expect them, mostly in commercial areas or in areas where there's destinations. So now let's talk about what's driving demand. So in slide 12, which says demand for chargers at the top, this is a projected growth based on the state of California's growth projections that have been extrapolated down to San Diego County, and then from there extrapolated down to the city of Encinitas. Encinitas has a slightly higher EV adoption rate than other areas in the state and within the county, and we've taken that into account in projecting future growth. So there's 2 kinds of electric vehicles that we have data for. There's plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles. In the past, they were both basically even sellers because most automotive manufacturers started with hybrids and then went on to plug-in hybrids, and only recently have we started to see a proliferation of large numbers of battery electric vehicle models. Going forward, battery electric vehicles will overtake plug-in hybrid vehicles by far, as you can see on this graph. We're expecting up to 15,000 electric vehicles by 2030. The vast majority of those will be battery electric, and therefore there will be demand for chargers, as depicted in the next slide. So this slide here explains in very high-level details kind of how we did the work. Basically, extrapolating down, we used a tool called EV Pro Lite, which is developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. We're assuming that the majority of EV drivers will have access to at-home charging, and that's by far the most convenient way to charge a vehicle, but not everybody has access. And so the numbers are actually probably higher than this, but we wanted to provide a little bit of extra to make sure that we would address the needs of the disadvantaged populations who don't necessarily have access to active charging. And so what we're looking at is some projected growth targets in terms of chargers, both for level 2 and for DC fast chargers. And as you can see, we broke it into two timeframes, 2025 and 2030. Let's go to the next slide. And so one of the sources of input, so we did some technical analysis using EV Pro Lite that I mentioned. We also used sort of some of our, consultant magic, basically based on similar projects that we've done. By the way, we're doing EV roadmap projects like this all over the state of California. There's a huge demand right now, primarily at the regional level, which is where we're doing a lot of the work. But I want to, give a shout out to the city of Encinitas for being forward thinking and taking the initiative to develop its own plan. So in the next slide, what we did is this summarizes the public outreach process where we sought input from the community. And we did it in a couple of methods. We sent out notices to a huge number of people that Crystal managed. We had a person actually staffing the farmers market back a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And then later in the spring, we had an online workshop that was extremely well attended. And I must say, I was very impressed with how informed the participants at that online workshop were, and they had a lot of great suggestions. And we asked them to go to the website called Social Pinpoint to provide specific input on sort of concerns, questions, and suggestions for different types of chargers. So the map on the right of this slide illustrates the input that we received. And as you can see, we had massive amount of input. We got 131 comments, which, like I said earlier, we do regional planning for much, much larger regions, and we have only a fraction of this input. So again, I was very impressed with how much engagement from this community there was. The next slide, slide 16, shows a breakdown using charts of that input that we received. And as you can see, we had a lot of input on different charger types, both for DC fast chargers, as well as for level 2 chargers, as well as high power chargers. So high power chargers are really just a faster version of DC fast chargers. And going forward under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that the Biden administration is funding, specifically under the NEVI, which is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, that's funding these high-power chargers. And these are typically at 150 kilowatts and higher, which is about 3 times faster than the DC fast chargers that are more common today. So, for example, at Lazy Acres, there's a 50 kilowatt charger. A NEVI standard would be 3 times that. And in fact, you have to have at least 4 of them to qualify. So as you can see from these graphs, in addition to the types of chargers that were recommended, we received input on specifically where those are located, and that information is also shown on the map previously. And I'll show you in a few slides, actually a few slides, I'll show you exactly where they were recommended. So let's go to the next slide. So the proposed charger location. And the slide after that, slide 18, is sort of the criteria that we typically recommend for types of chargers. So as you can see, there's for fast charge, also known as DC fast charging or high power chargers, you want those where there's a really short dwell time. So think a coffee shop where you're going in, you're getting a cup of coffee, it's coming in a paper cup, I guess not in a plastic cup as I just learned, or going to the supermarket, you're not going to get a plastic bag, or a restaurant where you're getting a cardboard takeout container, or a restroom. Whereas for level 2 charging, you have a lot more time. You're typically there for a couple of hours. So you have longer dwell time activities, such as going to the beach. And Encinitas has a lot of beaches, and I'll talk about those in a couple of slides. The other thing you want to think about are things like parking configuration. Can you get in and out? Can you see the location of where those chargers are located? Is it going to be safe? The driver who's going to be coming in at night and charging their vehicle, is it going to be safe for her to walk back to her car late at night? Is there adequate lighting? Are there eyes on the streets? And a big issue for this plan is site control. So a big focus of our efforts were areas that the city of Encinitas has specific control over, or on sites controlled by other public agencies that the city can work with. We did identify some private sites, but the city's not in a position to mandate chargers at those sites other than through the building code. And then, of course, last but not least, convenience. You know, we really want to make it as easy as possible so that we reduce barriers to electric vehicle adoption. So let's talk about some of these locations on slide 19, future charger locations. So kind of a sort of a general rules of thumb are, you know, locate chargers where it's easy for drivers. You don't want to expect to put a charger somewhere where drivers not going to go. It's much better to take a place that are already popular destinations and add those chargers. And then you want to distribute them throughout the city to make sure that they're distributed equitably so that they're always close to most drivers. Okay, let's go to the next slide, slide 20. So this next series of slides talks about a number of different sub areas that we identified going into the public engagement process with help from city staff to identify kind of where are the key sort of nodes of activity throughout the city that would support charging. So again, we want to locate those chargers where people are already going, and it'll provide a more convenient charging experience and provide as seamless as possible so they can do their errands while they're getting their electrons into their vehicle battery. And so as you can see on the right, these images represent, and there's a legend on the top of the map. The pink circles are high-powered chargers. The purple circles are just regular DC fast chargers. And then I think it's a tan, and those are for level 2 chargers. So you can see these were actual input from the community members through the public engagement process using our social pinpoint. And then we extrapolate the numbers of chargers based on a formula that we devised to make sure that we had appropriate distribution geographically so that we're not concentrating all of the projected chargers in one location, but kind of spreading them around to meet projected need. And so the numbers are shown for both level 2 chargers and for DC fast chargers. We didn't break it down between DC fast and high power chargers because that's really going to largely be determined by available electrical capacity. But as you can see, there's usually a larger number of level 2 chargers than DC fast chargers. One reason which is you don't need as many DC fast chargers because of course you can charge a vehicle much more quickly, and they're far more expensive. So from a capital investment perspective, you know, they're a much more significant investment, and so you have to be reasonable in terms of the expectations on implementation. So let's go to slide 21, which is downtown Encinitas, and this chart here breaks, so that first chart didn't break it down because Encinitas Ranch Town Center is a fairly large shopping center, but this is downtown is a lot, it's a traditional grid type city. And so what we've done is identified some locations where we think chargers should be concentrated. Again, these are areas that the city typically has access or has control over, or can work with another agency such as a school district to install those chargers. And as you can see, it's broken down by type, so identifying the types of chargers, what the specific destination is, and then the numbers for both level 2 and DC fast chargers for both 25 and 2030. And so the next series of charts that I'm going to be showing you break it down the same way. Again, the location, type, 25 and 2030 planned charging needs. And again, the idea is that not everybody is going to be driving electric vehicles by 25. A lot of them, it'll take time for the entire fleet to transition. And I should add that the governor last year mandated that after the year 2035, nothing but electric vehicles, or I should say zero emission vehicles, will be sold in the state of California. So it's going to take some time to get there. And so there's no reason to do all of the chargers at one time. So they should be phased in over time. So let's take a look at the next slide, which should say North Coast Highway 101. This is north of downtown. Again, a strip of commercial, which has a lot of destinations, including several very popular beaches. And what we've tried to do is recommend a relatively small number of chargers in each of these destinations so that they're geographically distributed. Let's go to the next slide, El Camino Real and Encinitas Boulevard. So this is a more commercial area, again, mostly private property, but there are some important areas where there's a lot of activity, and so these are areas that the city can work with the private landowners and developers to help incentivize chargers. There's a number of public incentives, and some of those are identified in the plan, that the city can collaborate with private developers and landowners to help provide support for adding chargers in these locations when the city does not have direct control itself. Let's go to the next slide, which should say, let's see, I can never pronounce this. Olivenhain, did I do it right?
Olivenhain.
Oh, wait. Olivenhain. I have trouble with this word. Sorry. Again, this is a part of the city that is primarily dominated by single-family residential. So you don't have a lot of commercial here. There's very little city-controlled property. So we have identified kind of the key node or the key nodes of activity, and these were some locations on the map that members of the community recommended, and we've identified a number of, relatively small number of chargers for this area. Again, most folks do charge at home. The most popular places to charge are at home, and the second most is at work. But this area is primarily single family, so the demand is not going to be that great, but we do want to provide geographic equity. So the next slide shows South Coast Highway 101. This is a much larger geographic area with a mixture of single family, but there's also a number of large parks, and those parks have very large parking lots. So those parking lots are very suitable for adding chargers. What we don't want to do is dominate a public parking lot with chargers because it's EV only, and early on, especially when the percentage of EV drivers is relatively small. We don't want to alienate non-EV drivers. Eventually, they will likely be driving EVs in the future, so those can get added over time. And as you can see, there's a fairly large number of level 2 chargers, 57 recommended by 2030, as opposed to only 21 by 2025 on the AC side or the level 2 side. And then on the DC side, 7 in the first horizon in 2025, and then another 3 for a total of 10 in 2030. Let's see, why don't we go to the next slide, which should say Encinitas Boulevard and Moonlight Marketplace. And this is the last of the sub areas that we've looked at. This one's really close to Interstate 5. So this might, in addition to local drivers, could attract motorists that are heading north or south on Interstate 5, and they can pull into chargers that are located here. Again, we've identified a relatively small number for 2025, a far greater number in year 2030, and the most likely locations would be both the Eki Sports Park, which has a very large parking lot, but the city owns the Public Works facility, which is really close, and it's also very close to commercial. So the city controls that, even though it's unlikely that a large number of EV drivers are going to just want to visit Public Works, but it is close to commercial, so there's a number of services that they can use while they're charging their vehicles. There's also quite a bit of commercial, as I mentioned. And in the plan itself, there's a paragraph or two explaining kind of how each of these would work and kind of the rationale for selecting these specific locations. So I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions about the geography of our recommendations before I move on to the strategic recommendations?
Yes,
Right,
I have.
skip ahead. Go ahead.
I have a question. Were businesses asked of where they would like the chargers, especially anything that would be a tourist business?
I can answer that one. Sorry,
Yes,
Mike. Do you want?
tried to. Sure. Let me just say that we were encouraging them to participate through the general outreach process.
Yeah, and I can add that we reached out to all of our businesses that have licenses in the city and directly asked them all to participate in the outreach. So they were definitely invited to provide input. Yeah.
Can I say something super quick? So there's a small error in the report. It says the Botanic Garden is county. A portion of the Botanic Garden is county, but the portion where the parking lot is city-owned. So the actual site that's noted in the report that has 3 3 chargers is on city-owned property. And then it doesn't mention the Heritage Ranch parking lot, which is also city-owned, which is across the street from there.
Thank
so those
you,
are 2
Ari.
city-owned spots
We'll correct
that get about 200,000 cars a year, well, 200,000 people a year, probably about 90,000 cars a year.
Excellent. That's good to know. Sorry for making that a mistake, but we can fix that. Are there other questions about the geography before we move on to strategic recommendations? Okay, slide 28. I'm going to go through this list and kind of explain this. And again, these are explained in more detail in the plan itself, which I would encourage everyone to take a look at. So the first of these general or strategic recommendations, meaning that they're not specific to geography, but these really apply citywide, is, and I think, the last series of slides illustrate this point, which is to install chargers at popular public destinations. And we've identified a number of them. Encinitas is very well endowed with public destinations such as parks, including beaches, libraries, sports parks, community centers, and so forth. And to do so over time. Again, it's adding charging infrastructure often requires electrical system upgrades, especially for facilities that were anticipated to not have large electrical loads. And adding charging infrastructure, especially DC fast charging, has a fairly significant electrical load. So it takes, it's a significant investment, and it takes time to install them. The good news is we do have time between now and 2030 at least before, we're all driving electric vehicles. But use that time to install those throughout the city. The second strategic recommendation is to select charger types based on anticipated dwell times. And I tried to explain that in an earlier slide, so I don't need to explain this more. The third is to select mid to high output chargers when feasible. And that is that, for example, for level 2 chargers, and I don't like the term level 2, it implies that they're all the same, but there's quite a bit of difference between a low output level 2 charger, which might produce only 6.6 kilowatts versus a high-powered level 2 charger, which can go all the way up to 19.2 kilowatts. So again, big difference. There's not surprisingly a large difference in the cost between a 6.6 and an 11.2. So if you have the ampacity, if there's sufficient electrical capacity, it makes sense to go larger rather than smaller. And the same is true for DC fast charging, although there's a much greater price difference or cost difference between a 50 kilowatt charger and, say, a 350 kilowatt charger. Speaking of which, we need to think about the future. So don't think about what we have today. Think about what it's going to be like in 5 or 10 years. So try as much as possible to future-proof investments. The point number 5 here is an equity point, and that is to prioritize chargers for those lacking access to home charging, typically those who live in multi-unit residential buildings. It's very, very expensive to upsize electrical service in an apartment building or a condo building. And so there's not a lot of incentive for developers. For new construction, the code mandates it, so that's not as much of an issue for new construction or for major remodels that require permits. But for existing buildings, it's unlikely that most apartment owners and even condo owners are likely to make those investments. So this is where the city can really pitch in and help by providing charging convenient for their residents. Point number 6 is, again, as I mentioned, the second most popular place to charge is at work. And so encouraging employers to provide EV charging at work sites is really important. It's my understanding that Encinitas is a fairly automobile-dependent population in terms of commuting. And so work sites are a very appropriate place to add charging. And number 7 is to provide geographic equity. And we tried to do this both through the input that we received from the community, through the community involvement process, and then as well by working with the city parks department, for example, to make sure that each of the parks were evaluated as potential locations to add chargers. And then number 8 is to prioritize the needs of disadvantaged populations. So this could be those who don't necessarily speak English or don't have, as I mentioned earlier, access to at-home charging, or maybe could but don't have the financial means. So again, this ties into some of the other points about geographic equity as well. And then last but not least, encourage and assist private property owners to apply for grants and incentives. And California is a good place to be in terms of grant and incentives. There's quite a few that are available and will likely be available in the future, but not everybody is aware of that. So one of the roles the city can play in implementing this plan is by working with private property owners and developers and property managers to become aware of various incentives and work collaboratively with those incentive providers and the property owners. So that's it for the presentation. So the last slide is discussion, and then I think, Crystal, you want to talk a little bit about the agenda item, which is the action that is required?
Yeah, so as a reminder, the action before you tonight is to provide input on the draft EV charging station master plan. And then secondly, to recommend that City Council adopt the plan at a future council meeting.
So, Mike, so first I just want to say thank you for presenting this. I have 2 electric cars, and you know, I would say the number one thing that people worry about with electric cars is where am I going to charge the thing up? You know, how's it going to be, you know, convenient for me, and the whole range anxiety and all that. So I think, you know, having more investment in this is absolutely the number one thing for making that transition. However, you know, I currently have a high-speed level 2 charger at my house. And because of that, if I'm anywhere within 20 miles of my house, I'm going to charge at home. And I think the vast majority of electric car owners do that. They charge at home when they can. So I agree, prioritizing folks that don't have that ability to charge at home is probably a really good thing. But I also think your target audience is going to be like, for me, when I'm on the road, it's all DC fast charging. I mean, I filter out the level 2 chargers on my apps, and I just look for, I plan my trips around DC fast charging. So for me, the golden dream come true is finding a fast charger right off the freeway next to a Starbucks, so I can get my coffee, charge the car, use the bathroom, and watch the cars go by on the freeway, and then get back on real quick. So my thought is, yeah, anything you can do to attract people that are, tourists, visitors, I think it's a huge attraction. As I mentioned, I plan my trips around where the DC fast chargers are, anytime I go up I-5 or things like that. So strongly recommend that as far as, I think that's going to be a big part of the target audience or users for this system would be people that are not from Encinitas, but that are coming to visit that have electric cars.
Excellent points.
And I'll just add that I guess maybe another part of the population to consider is those that may not have access to home charging. It's great that the early adopters are the ones that do have that home charging, but ultimately we need to get to a point where all people that live in Encinitas have an opportunity to own an electric vehicle. And that means that we have to have public charging also in our city. DC Fast definitely would work ideally, I think, for them as well. I think the point is kind of the same, that DC Fast, no one wants to sit around for 2.5 hours while their car charges.
Right.
They want it to be quick.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that justifies having more of the level 2s, right? Because they take longer. So you're going to plug in and you're going to need 6-8 hours on it. So you're going to need more of those if you have more cars out there that need it, right? So.
Yeah.
And if you look at the recommendation, the locations, beaches, for example, was an example of where we recommended relatively large numbers of level 2 chargers, since if you're going to be at a beach all afternoon, you might as well be getting a charge while you're there.
Right.
I also have an electric car. We have an electric car that we've had for 10 years, and we definitely look for those fast chargings. And, we look for restaurants and whatever around those fast charging. And so, and we've traveled with it as well. And so I like to say yes, to what Commissioner Switzler was saying. The other question I have is, I think the technology for faster charging is going to be coming up, especially when you're looking at 2030 even. And will you, I mean, so how is that put into this plan of being able to change out possibly the old charging parts the old charging units that could be then upgraded? I mean, so I guess that's my question is how do you deal with the new technology of charging?
Well, I think one of the strategic recommendations that I mentioned is sort of to go big, if you will, to size electrical infrastructure upgrades to meet future charging needs. That's point number 4, and that a charger typically, if you ask a charge point or Blink how long a chargers last, they will typically say, we assume it'll be obsolete or it'll be worn out in a decade. So the life expectancy is up to 10 years. That said, the most significant part of the project cost, at least for a level 2 charger, isn't even the charger. It's the make-ready infrastructure to support the charge, meaning that to upsize the electrical service, which may require a new transformer, a new panel, or at least a new sub-panel, and the conduit. So by providing, and that's not going to change. So, we may have new charging technology, but electrical conduit supplying the size of the conductors going through that conduit isn't going to change. So providing oversized, or at least as big as you can to provide future capacity for growth is probably the safest thing a municipality can do to future-proof its infrastructure.
I have a question. I think it's probably for Crystal. Will all of these charging stations be supplied by Community Choice Energy? Will it be like the Power 100? Will this be 100% renewable?
That would be up to whoever owns the property and pays the electrical bill. So they would definitely have the option to be a part of SDCP. Most people in Encinitas have elected to stay with them and didn't transfer down to Power on the 50% renewable. So it's very likely that most of them would still be on Power 100, but ultimately it is up to that property owner to take that option.
So anything on city-owned property would be Power 100?
Yes, definitely. That's a good point. Yeah. So all city-owned, it was a council action to stick with Power 100 as our power choice. So that won't change unless there's a council action to change it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'm just curious, is this a part of the mobility element, or is it a standalone plan?
It's actually separate. So EV charging is not considered a mobility option per se. When we talk about mobility, we talk about other alternative modes of transportation completely separate from the automobile. So bikes, walking, transit, anything besides the automobile. So this is a kind of a standalone effort.
So that leads to my second question. Great segue. It's a silly question to ask today, but thinking forward into the future, where hopefully we'll have even more electric bikes and infrastructure to support safe electric bike usage, do we need public, bike charging? And do we see a world where, car charging, ports, have a bike charging attachment or something like that? And is that being thought about at all?
Good question. I guess not formally thought about, but since we have our bike share vendor B-Cycle, they have we've thought about it a bit, but there could be more thought that's had. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'll just, maybe as a qualified comment, I'll just say if there is such a thing, or anybody envisions there being such a thing as a car, electric vehicle charging station that also has bike adapters or something like that, I think maybe it would be nice to acknowledge that that's a potential. Because they need a fraction of the draw of vehicles, and if you've got the electric infrastructure already going through these, might be nice. And parking lots can relatively easily be made to have bike racks that are off to the side of spots and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, this opened up like a kind of can of worms, because I was thinking about this, but I don't want to draw out the discussion too long. and I'm sure this was thought about, but I just want to ask Mike and Crystal. I know we want to discourage use of automobiles within our city, so was there a thought into like a balance of not having too many chargers to encourage overusage of cars, especially for residents that could otherwise bike or walk? Or is that just not a concern with this number of chargers?
It's not necessarily not a concern, but I think the reality is that the automobile is not going away anytime soon, and that the convenience of it and all the benefits of the automobile are still present. The one negative thing, of course, is the emission. So that's really the focus here, is to, if someone still wants to drive a vehicle, how can they do it in the most least impactful way? And so that's where the electric vehicle comes in, and where we want to support that choice as well.
And I was going to say, I didn't see the numbers when they came up on City Hall or Public Works as the city transitions probably to an all-electric fleet. Has that been considered to make sure there's enough chargers to support the city's own electric
Yeah, that's
vehicle
another
use?
good point to make, is that this master plan is solely focused on public charging. So it doesn't address the fleet at all. That's a separate effort, and definitely one that's still happening, but not a part of this plan.
Just one quick question on
Most of the
implementation.
work that we do actually.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, there's a very different approach that you take to electrifying a fleet, because those vehicles typically are not, the charging locations are not typically accessible to the public. So this is very much focused on the public need.
So one more quick question. For the implementation, is it envisioned you're going to use like an existing network, like EVgo is here by the City Hall, and there's Blink, I think also, or is it going to be each individual, like if a business decides to implement a charger, they're going to be able to select their own network?
Yeah, so there's, like you mentioned, there's multiple vendors out there, and this plan does not specify any one vendor. A property owner could elect whichever one
Okay.
they so choose. So yeah,
So the property owner would have that?
the property owner would,
Okay.
and the city would have to follow its procurement process to select vendors as well.
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm happy to make a motion to accept the recommendation that the city council adopt this electric vehicle charging station master plan.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Good luck with the rest of the process. Okay, we are now on action item 8B. Crystal.
Okay, thank you, Ari. So this is the monthly update to the commission's work plan. And as in typical fashion, I'll go through the work plan items and highlight the status of each and just what happened within the last month. So under the Environmental Awards Program, there was a press release that went out on March 2nd announcing the opening of the nominations, and the nomination period will be open through March 31st. And then under project number 3, which is the native plant policy, on January 25th, 2023, City Council directed staff to initiate the development of a native plant ordinance. So that is now in process. Under item number 4, the no smoking ordinance, the draft ordinance was introduced to council during a public hearing on February 15th, and due to changes directed by council, the ordinance is tentatively scheduled to, it's actually now officially scheduled, to be reintroduced on March 15th. And then as it relates to the general plan safety element and the climate vulnerability study, I always have trouble with that word, the commission received a report and item on the safety element and the climate assessment during your last meeting on February 9th, and recommended that council approve the element. And then under project 7, which is the 5-year climate action plan update, I will note that transportation data that is required from SANDAG to kind of do the initial analysis of the inventory for the climate action plan. SANDAG is currently not fulfilling requests for that data, so staff and consultants are looking at possibly getting that data in another way. At the moment, the process is on hold until we make this determination. Meetings are scheduled though, and we should have a decision soon, and then the project will move forward. And then the very next thing would be to develop the public outreach plan, which is actually already under development concurrently. And then moving down to project number 13, the integrated pest management policy. Staff is coordinating an ad hoc subcommittee meeting with Parks and Recreation staff and commissioners on the subcommittee. And that meeting should be scheduled fairly soon.
Can I ask you just a very
Sure.
nitpicky question?
Yeah.
So we don't formally have a subcommittee for IPM. So do we consider the group of commissioners assigned a subcommittee, or what? It's a terminology
I guess that's
question.
a good point. Yeah. That was my assumption, but if you want to make it more formal than that, then you can definitely do so.
But if
Okay.
I mean, usually we have to actually create an action to create a subcommittee,
Yeah.
and we haven't.
Yeah, so I guess I could use less formal language there and say the commissioners assigned to that.
Okay, but I
project.
just also want to,
Yeah.
whatever you need to do to stay within Brown Act compliance too. So.
Yeah, I think as long as it's just the two, well, how many commissioners? 3 as long as it's less than quorum, I can double check that with the.
I don't have a strong opinion. I just was
Yeah.
noting the language.
No, that's a really good point, and I will definitely double check and make sure that we're within Brown Act compliance there. But my understanding is that as long as you're not more than quorum, that you can still meet and with those commissioners that have been assigned.
Okay, and then I would suggest if we haven't formally created a subcommittee, we probably shouldn't use that language.
Great. Yes.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the clarification. And I can actually, I'll make that correction here on this update. And then the last one is the regarding project number 16, which is Bee City USA. The application to become a Bee City was submitted, and it's under review by the Bee City organization, and we should know within a month, they said, whether we were accepted or not.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So I think the application requires the city to have an IPM policy. So did you submit the existing IPM policy?
Yeah, it does require, but they also say that that and the other requirements can be completed within the first year of your affiliation. So that part will be easy for us because we do have an IPM plan already. Some of the other components, like the native plant policy, that still does need to be developed, but it's in process, which is good.
Thanks.
And if there's any questions, you guys can discuss now and then approve the updates.
All right, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the updates.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, we are now on 9. 9A. That's me. Okay.
This is new grounds for me. Is this where the work that we hope to do on the bag issue comes in?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, to move forward with agenda reports and to getting the plastic bag issue before council, to get it on an agenda or into a work plan, is 9 the area that we create the ability to do that?
It could be 8 or 9, but we would have that conversation, if we're gonna have any conversation today, it would be in 11.
Okay.
Yeah, and then depending on if you form a subcommittee or other things, it may or may it could come in an eventual 8 or 9.
I'll wait till 11.
Thank you. Okay, so 8A, that's me, I guess. 9A, thank you, sorry, it's late, I'm tired. Okay. I have submitted a commissioner-initiated item, really just procedural here. It's to, and I want to thank Crystal for making me, I think, and some of us aware that, of how some of the other commissions are functioning and, trying to learn from them to be more efficient and organized. And so we became aware that, through Crystal, that some of the other commissions have a standing subcommittee, to evaluate speakers, essentially. And so instead of, very, very simple, more or less, this is instead of us always having to have a action item to look at the speaker list and approve it, instead we would create a standing subcommittee. The subcommittee can meet whenever it wants to under the subcommittee rules, and then quarterly or however often it feels like it wants to bring the speaker, schedule to the committee for approval. And I don't, maybe they wouldn't even need formal approval, they could just do it. But anyway, just be a way to get that item off of the agenda here, empower a subcommittee to kind of make it work, and get it moving however the subcommittee determines is good. So sort of simple.
Did you go over this? Would we just, if you're not on the subcommittee, you can reach out to the subcommittee and suggest speakers still, and they just sort of organize and coordinate? Cool.
Exactly. My hope would be that, the subcommittee does not, turn into the gatekeepers, that they do good sort of, work and make sure everybody's represented, but just take on that organizing principle.
I'm for it. Let's do it.
Okay, so then we need either a double motion or two. One would first be to approve the creation of the standing subcommittee, and the second would be to appoint commissioners. Maybe I'll make a motion to approve the committee if there's no further discussion.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? No, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, anybody? Okay, so now, anybody want to serve on the subcommittee? Even though I don't want to, I will do it just because I put this forward. But I'll be happy to be one of them.
All happy to be one of them.
All right, we got two. We could have up to three, but we don't need three. We can do it with two.
I'll do it if no one else wants to.
Okay, look at that. We got three.
There we go.
So we have a motion for Commissioners Switzler, Morrison, and Novi to comprise this subcommittee. Do you guys want a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, that was fast. All right, item 10. Anybody have any updates?
I have the public apology where I don't know how to use calendars, so sorry for sending that out from my family calendar to everybody from Sherry to tonight's meeting. I added it to my family calendar and out it went. I think I did it to somebody else too, and they haven't come back. Like Crystal was very nice to my wife.
We all accept it.
What's for dinner? Any other updates? Okay, so now let's move to 11, future commissioner-initiated agenda items.
Is your mic on?
To
Yeah.
get to city council for approval. If you didn't hear me, that was the plastic bags and any other.
Yep. Yes. I
plastic
mean,
items.
it's sort of up to you. I mean, you have a lot of options. You could, an action would come to. You could have an additional information item in the future where you give a draft agenda for us to discuss. If you think that you're going to get to a draft, like a more or less complete, draft of an ordinance, you can bring that in with an action to propose to approve to send to city council. You could also, if you think this is complex enough, create a subcommittee, have the subcommittee work on it, and then have them bring it. So it's up to you. You do not need to create the future agenda item now, you have up to a week before, whenever the deadline is for any future meeting to get it on the agenda. So it's totally your call. I think you heard, we're not supposed to discuss it because it was just an informational item today, but I think you
Right.
heard a lot of support that the commission is broadly interested in this.
Question, is an agenda report required to go along with kind of something that may turn into a proposed ordinance?
Yeah, if you wanted to agendize it under Section 9, then you would need an agenda report to go along.
Okay. Yeah, so that might be our next step, but maybe we can get back on the exact action item to propose? Or do you want to propose something now?
Yeah, this is the first, I have no language that I can throw at you that I'm trying to, I just wanted to get to
So
a point where we can discuss it, and I can bring
You
it.
don't need to do anything now, and not doing anything now doesn't cut off any options or,
Right.
or any timing. So there's no reason to try to figure it out now. You have the great benefit of former prize-winning commissioner Jim Wong. It sounds like, working with you, and he and Crystal, are real experts, depending on, what strategy you choose to bring this forward to the commission to advise you on your options and best ways. And so I would talk to both of those individuals amongst yourselves and take it forward. And I think, whatever happens, you'll find a very willing collaboration group here.
Well, I think I used 11 last time to get to this point to be able to discuss it with everyone.
You don't need to use it here, yeah. What all 11 does is if I wanted to say right now, I know I'm going to have an agenda item next meeting, I can declare that here and essentially, provide direction to staff to get that on the agenda here, and then I have to make sure I have the agenda report. But just as easily, as long as I get the agenda report to staff or the request before the deadline for posting, whenever they prepare the agenda, you can do it. You don't have to do it here. There's no real advantage to doing it here.
So an agenda report trying to get this into the work plan?
Nope.
So we can
You
just, no.
don't need to do any of those things. You just need to decide what your strategy is to bring this to the commission.
Maybe help me out.
Yeah, and you can, whatever you decide that is going to be, and I sort of see three possibilities, right? One is another informational item where you would bring a draft ordinance back, not for decisions, but for discussion, right? A second thing would be the same thing, but doing it in subcommittee. So creation of a recommendation to create a subcommittee to work on this, so more people, from the commission could work together with an eventual goal of bringing a draft ordinance to the commission. And then the third would be working on it until you have a more or less a completed almost completed draft ordinance, and then bringing that directly as an action item, and I bet you that's what Jim's going to tell you to do, because that's what he usually likes to do. But you have the freedom to do any of those for any meeting. You don't have to, announce it as a future commissioner-initiated agenda item.
So a week before the next.
Whenever they, I think it depends on the calendar, but whenever they write, they write out and say, if you have anything, we need to know by this date.
And point of order, we have 1 minute till the meeting ends, and unless we want to take a motion to extend the meeting another 15 minutes, we'll need to wrap it up.
I'd rather not take that motion.
I'm good.
I think we're all in favor of that.
Okay, well then I think we're ready to adjourn. Thank you all. Very good.
I'm sorry, you had something you were going to say.
I'll just talk to Mark about it.
Dang it, sorry.
That's okay. Why?